thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully people will be drifting back in. Otherwise, we've definitely got the graveyard shift at the back end of the day overall. So I'd just like to start, really, as other presenters have done, by thanking SMI for inviting us to come and be part of this conference today. And certainly, both in the presentations this morning, but certainly those ones between lunch and this session, we've started to unpack some of those real challenges that are out there around decarbonising for this sector. And, you know, the Navy is going to literally be no different in there overall. A tiny bit about why am I stood here. I wasn't the last person in the queue, when the sort of job was handed out. But really, over the last 15 years or so, I've been looking at how decarbonisation will affect the Royal Navy overall, starting back in 2007 when I tried to test two hypotheses. First of all, how will the military and the Navy in particular maintain its fighting edge as we transition to a low-carbon economy? And secondly, how important is it that defence and the Navy, by fact, remains aligned to the society it purports to defend, and therefore maintains its alignment with its responsibilities overall. Admiral Paul Beattie is our lead in the headquarters at the moment, but across the sort of next 20 minutes or so, hopefully the three things I really want to land with you. First of all, where's defence in this conversation? Secondly, where's the broader Navy in this conversation? And thirdly, a bit of a case study on what we've been up to in the naval base. And then really, in those 15 years since I started theorising around this, I've turned that into delivery action. And each job I've done, I've tried to bring carbon and carbon considerations into that delivery environment. And as you get more senior, you get more opportunity to do so. So it's been really exciting over the last 3 years or so to bring that to life. I think it wouldn't be a presentation about defence if we didn't just reflect on the events in Ukraine and remind ourselves that defence's primary aim, of course, is to defend the country. And therefore, some of the specific challenges that I think we face in this sector is some of the peculiar issues that we have to deal with. Combining some of the key technologies when we go to sea with high explosives and people and putting them in harm's way overall. I'm not saying that defence is going to be different, but I think we've got some interesting considerations that we need to bring to the fore. We have got some interesting and additional levers that I'm going to come through the presentation just to touch on as well. And I think that the final thing just to say in opening is that we're still, I think, probably having quite a debate in defence, in the defence sector overall. So whilst I was described the other day as a zealot in a good way, so whilst I might be sort of slightly further out on the spectrum in terms of where my view and my understanding of this challenge sits from a defence perspective, there are a really broad section of views that are out there. So I'm not speaking universally for either the Navy or defence, but most importantly, I'm trying to provoke that conversation. And you'll see again from some of the stuff that we've been up to, how we've been trying to demonstrate through leadership in delivery how we can actually shift some of these factors. And of course, it's not just a national conversation or internal Navy and then defence conversation. There's quite a broad international conversation as well, and that's a really important part of what we're up to. So I thought, well, this is going to be quite easy. You know, if I just put up the slide about where the Navy's strategy on net zero carbon is, you can very clearly see from the left-hand end oh no, maybe not. So this is actually quite a complicated conversation. And I don't put that up there lightly because I'm trying to, belittle the progress that we've made in this area. But a lot of those factors that we've been hearing throughout the course of today really play out, I think, in the defence conversation overall. So where is defence? Well, defence outputs are already being challenged by climate change overall. And of course, the little box that we've highlighted here on this slide just demonstrates that, net zero carbon and the regulation around net zero carbon is just one of those complexities that sit in the strategic environment that exists when you're trying to set a military strategy into play and convert that strategy and policy framework into capability and then operational output overall. So there are a lot of demands that are out there overall, and there is a bit of the debate that's definitely going on at the moment, which says, should defence not be exempt from this? Should we not say, look, we're very special. We're only 50% of government emissions, central government emissions overall. So if everybody tries a little bit harder, then the Navy and defence probably will be okay, and we can just get on with the things that we need to do. But I think actually what's important here is that we don't start the journey over the next 28 years with an assumption that we'll get some sort of exemption. We should start the journey over the next 28 years with an assumption that the world is going to change and we need to change with it. Yes, we need to preserve the outputs that we deliver, but we are definitely going to be on quite a complex journey as we progress through this process overall. And I think that, therefore, is one of those issues that are out there to resolve. You know, there's plenty of other things that we need to do in order to uphold the international rules-based system, in order to play our part in delivering global Britain, for us to be a relevant navy that's able to defend the nation overall. And all of those risks, if you combine them together, really sort of fit into three broad boxes. One where we need to adapt and think about the role that defence will play in climate security. My earlier work was not about climate change and how it's going to lead to conflict. My work was about climate change, decarbonisation, and how it's going to affect how we operate as a military overall. But we've got to see that there's a balance of adaptation that's going to be out there so that we make ourselves resilient, so that we can deliver defence's primary aims, but also of mitigation so that we can, again, understand and reduce the impact that we have in this overall sphere. And of course, the final box really there is sort of the policy framework, the leadership, the commitments, and the accountabilities that sit in the delivery of any government outcomes overall. Nonetheless, all of those risks really come down to that comment on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. You know, whatever we do, we're going to have increased pressure. We're going to have increased pressure on the delivery of our defence outputs, whether they are financially, whether they are people-related, whether they are the demand that is placed on us as an organisation overall. And I think what's really important is that we can't therefore assume that we're going to get relief on all of those pressures. The adaptation that we need to make, the mitigation actions that we need to make, it needs to address some of those points overall. And of course, defence, you know, as we know, sits within that broader government framework overall. You know, we're not exempt from the carbon budgets. We're having this broader debate about, you know, what elements within defence will be net zero, whether it's every building will be a net zero building, or whether we can roll that back up again and look at how we perhaps trade out in some areas. And I'll use that in the case study that I talk about in the naval base in due course. I think the good thing about this as well is that we will benefit from the transitional industrial strategies or industry and economic strategies that more broadly government are playing out overall. And I think, you know, again, defence is probably not going to be leading in a number of these areas, but will look to exploit the opportunities that are created by those sector transitions as they come to fruition over time. And that balance of what defence needs to do, how it needs to set out its primary objectives, its special requirements, and then the broader change in the environment that is going to be driven by the industrial strategies and some of the other transitions that we're going to go through, whether they're the fuel-based transitions that we've been hearing a little bit about throughout the course of the day so far, or whether they be some of the other transitions that will play out, I think will be an interesting, again, combination of the mechanisms by which defence is going to begin to go and then travel along this journey overall. So in a defence terms, what have we been up to? It's a combination of an NAA report, the Richard Nugent report, and other factors fed into, about 12 months ago, MOD publishing its climate change and sustainability strategic approach. And that was the department's response to that combination of evidence that came forwards overall. I very fortunately was able to contribute to some of the work that went into that, and actually it's really interesting to see some of the ideas that, and hypotheses that we've been testing through my current command in the naval base play out and roll up into some of the broader departmental strategy as it comes forwards. And that, you know, that then allows us, I think, to distill from that strategic approach, how is it that we're going to set out our investment priorities and what is it that we're going to get after overall. The Nugent report was interesting because it was at an appropriate time. I mean, you know, we go through cycles with this. This is the second of the cycles I've been through, really, in this sort of 15-year journey I've been on. And, it may be that we cycle back out and then we cycle up again in due course. It's, one of those things that we feature in some of the conversations we had. Post the integrated review, or the SDSR, in 2010, there was a lot of focus on carbon emissions and climate change from a defence perspective overall. And that resulted in 12-13 quite a lot of targets that were handed down to the individual commands, the Navy being one of them, and how we were going to respond to that in setting out plans. We drifted back from that for a bit. We lost some of the focus, I think, over that conversation. And it has been reasserted now. And actually what I think is interesting for me is, having been through a couple of those cycles, this definitely feels like it's far more embedded in the senior leadership of the organisation, and therefore I think something that I can see some more progress on how we're going to deliver on the challenge that we face overall. MOD is good at organisations, so I always used to joke that the outcome of any of our sort of transformation initiatives was a new 3-star officer and a new portfolio office, because that's our sort of standard response. But in this instance, a new 2-star directorate, which really gives us leadership from the MOD perspective. Importantly, it does two things. First of all, it represents defence up and out into central government. That responsibility that defence has in engaging with the broader conversation across government, I think is fundamental to our success here. And secondly, it creates the framework to allow defence to manage in and down to itself, and therefore to distill some of the broader defence targets into specific areas, and then really understand how it's going to translate its challenge into action overall. It also acts as a focal point for our international defence engagement in this area. Why is that important? So much of what we do is built on alliances and partnerships, NATO being the cornerstone of our defence. So when we talk about fuels and fuel standards, the ones that we're interested in are those that are allied with NATO standards as well, because fundamentally that's how we operate. So one of the challenges I think we're going to have as we move into this sector is how much UK shapes and influences the international debate, as much as how much the UK and the Royal Navy then operates within a framework of an alliance overall. And that may be one of the impediments to some of the progress that we make. I think the two bits at the bottom are really important. So, in the working principles of this, we're going to work across the defence organisations. So there's a bit of bottom-up in the organisation where we've got perhaps some pockets of good practice, coming together with a better structured approach for defence to really understand how it's going to solve the problem it's got to be journeying over the next 28 years or so. And then secondly, I think preserving that military capability whilst advancing, accelerating the departmental approach. So Richard Nugent's report said really two things. First of all, this is entirely achievable from a defence perspective. Okay, there's some challenges that we've been hearing about, and I'm not saying that those challenges aren't going to be difficult or expensive to overcome, but you can see a path to us solving this problem. He also said that this primary role of defence is to must sit at the front end of everything that we do. So when we talk about where we think about and consider carbon within our decision-making processes, for example, it will always sit as one of the variables, not necessarily the variable that will define some of the decisions and choices that we make overall. And then finally, putting our arms around the problem. So when we've developed this concept of what we would describe as the defence carbon baseline in a scope 1, 2, 3 conventional definition, and then the scope plus elements of it, how that plays out into our indirect scope 3 emissions, and in particular how that plays out in the supply chain and some of the things that we might want to do overall. And I think this is classic where the cross-cutting economic sectors and the transition of the economic sectors will be able to be interpreted back into how defence is then going to operate, incentivise, and bring change together. So that's broadly where defence is. We've got a structure now that sits above us in the head office in MOD that understands what defence's challenge looks like, that's setting up the right frameworks, that's plugging us into central government, and is helping us to conceptualize and then put our arms around the problem. So now to where we really are, I think, probably as a Navy overall. And I say it's a strategy for a strategy rather than the blank slide I put up earlier on. Because, we haven't yet got to, what's the end state that we're after? We haven't yet got to, what are the ways in which we're going to get there in a conventional strategic sense. And we certainly haven't sort of set out what the means are that we're going to get there. What we've done is we've discretized, so we've broken down the strategic approach from the MOD into the sort of broad 10 factors that I've set out here on the slide. And then we've set out and prioritized those areas that we think, this is a discussional, a discursive piece at the moment, we've set out those areas that we think at this point in time are the areas that we would wish to prioritize against. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've written under the very high boxes, because they're probably the ones that are of most interest overall. So there's clearly a list of tasks that sit under each of these boxes overall. So in sustainable culture and behavior, this is about building the skills. I mean, we've heard from Brian Johnson just before the break there, about this sort of really quite challenging set of skills that we'll need to grow in order to conduct this transition. And as I mentioned at the sort of front end of this piece, the defence is not yet settled on, we're all a bunch of tree huggers, certainly. And so I think, there are people, zealots like me in a good way, who are trying to provoke and prompt the system overall. I mean, I'm an engineer by background. I've got some basic skills in this area, but I'm certainly not a sustainability expert by any means, by any stretch of any means whatsoever. So we do need to think about and then build the skill sets. And it's not just the conventional skill sets around environmental management. It's the broader set of skills that we will each need in order to change the culture of the organization and begin to bring carbon as a value proposition into some of the choices and decisions that we make overall. I'm going to use the built estate as my case study, so I'm just going to jump over that one for a moment. I am going to just touch on the climate security and international piece. I think it's important that we maintain that alignment with our allies and partners because interoperability is so fundamental, has been for years, and I would say it's going to be increasingly so as we move forward into this more complex strategic environment that will define the early part of the 21st century for us overall, or we believe it will do. Not all this is about equipment, but some of it is about equipment. So the box on operational capability, being ex-capability desk officer, this is about, for us, getting senior responsible owners of the deliverers of that operational capability to have a responsibility for embedding sustainability principles into the capabilities that they bring out. This is about us thinking about force design and bringing carbon into the concepts of that force design process. Does that mean there will be more or less autonomous systems? Don't know. More or less ships? Don't know. More or less space? Don't know. But fundamentally, what we're doing at the moment is ignoring the carbon liabilities that we're laying out for our successors. And therefore, if we need to do anything at this point in time, my point would be we need to expose what those challenges are going to look like for our successors, so at least they've got an understanding of how it is that they're going to play that out overall. And of course, that's just one of those variables against creating a successful MOD, a successful Royal Navy that's able to confront the challenges that you ask of it overall. So we need to understand some of those specific military requirements and how the changing construct of the technologies that we employ, the economic sectors, the underpinning skills are going to play out in that area, so that we preserve some of the high-end warfighting capability that we need to do in order to confront and fight and win in the 21st century. It's back to the basic premise that I tried to test in 2007. How are we going to continue to be successful whilst these transitions happen with us and around us overall? And then finally, the environment in which we're going to be fighting. We need to understand that. We need to get better understanding of and better granularity around the models that we use. So we set the specifications of the key equipments and the environmental conditions that we expose our people to so that they are able to operate in those environments and they are able to be successful overall. So it's a really important component of it because it's the front end of our conceptual force design process, a really critical part for us to start the early thinking in. Procurement and industry, clearly, understanding the trends, understanding the technology trends and their impact on our ability to fight, and also using our buying power in order to shape and influence what those supply chains look like is really important to us. One of the things that's landed in the climate change and sustainability approach, in fact, it's made itself into policy already, is that by date in the future, we will potentially only contract with people who are able to demonstrate a successful path to net zero by 2050. And it's, in the way that we have done with other elements of social value, modern slavery, for example, it's important, therefore, that we're using the buying power of defence in order to work with partners to drive change overall. Commercial and finance really important. So, we bring our commercial officers with us, that we manage our contracts effectively. And I can't be there already, Rob. No, surely not. Well, I'm going to overrun because you gave us an extra 5 minutes. So it's really important, that we set our commercial elements correctly. And then finally, in the finance piece, and this is a particular challenge that I have at the moment, is how do we monetize carbon and bring the cost of carbon into some of the decision-making processes that we've got as well. We haven't touched much on the financial aspects other than to say this is going to be an expensive evolution for us. But I think it's important, particularly as we bring some of the more complex cases together, that we're able to do this. So now for my, tour de force on the case study. And we'll whiz through a couple of these, and I'm really happy to take further questions over the reception and dinner this evening. So why are naval bases important? Well, I'm a naval base commander, so I would say naval bases are really important overall. But if we break down the figures, so about 65% of the energy consumed in the Navy is by its operational energy, so its ships and its aircraft, and about 35% by its estate. And of that 35%, over 70% is sat within its 3 naval bases. We're the single largest energy-consuming sites in defence. Portsmouth and Clyde, vie with each other. And we sit, both Portsmouth and Devonport, sit in the centres of cities that have declared climate emergencies and therefore for which we need to engage really effectively overall. So Portsmouth, 2/3 of the surface fleet, 10,000 people a day in and out the site, really quite a large, complex industrial site. And one that's got a really interesting landscape for us to test out some of the decarbonising programme overall. But a story of great success. So, 2/3 reduction in Scope 1 emissions since the 03-04 baseline, largely as a result of a cost-led strategy. So we can do these things, and we can change quite rapidly through this process. Most importantly, I think the site-wide metering in 2009 and 10, it was that creation of a robust data set that created the business cases and the virtuous reinvestment cycle to go forwards. So really important as well. So we've been doing cold ironing for over 100 years in Portsmouth Naval Base. I operate the largest private network, electrical network in the southeast. So the recent call for evidence around shore power for UK shore, I think, is going to be really good because we've got some great evidence to sit underneath that. I've got 2 slides left, Rob, well, 3 really, and then I'll be done, I promise. So where have we got to so far? So on that story that we've had, on that really broad and long, and last 20 years success story overall, we've continued to baseline. So we've set ourselves some really quite demanding targets. We want to be net zero carbon, Scope 1 and 2 by 2030, Scope 3 by 2040, and a potential sink for the shipping that we know we will be operating in 2050 through our naval base estate, and we reckon we can do that overall. We've done a bunch of stuff this year, including grabbing some money from other government departments in order to provide the investment overall, and we've done a bunch of feasibility studies that get us after the next phase of the transition to the next opportunities that are out there. And I think critically for me, we've built a model, great, but we've built a really good model that allows us to look and forecast over the next 30 years and say, what are the interventions that we need to make in order for us to then drive to those targets that we've set ourselves overall. And we've demonstrated through the technologies, through the assumptions that exist around the greening of the grid, and through the assumptions that then will underpin that around the technologies that will become available through the 2030s and into the 2040s, that is a viable and effective route overall. But I need to monetize carbon in order to do that. And this is one of the impediments and challenges for me overall. So I will draw stumps. And there's a lot more in the, I mean, I can do a whole hour on the case study if you really want, but I'm not allowed. I know I'm not allowed. Yes, exactly, yeah. Yeah, okay, so decarbonising defence, where have we got to? We've got a really broad approach. You know, there's a big challenge out there. You know, there's a big challenge conceptually, there's a big challenge culturally, but, you know, in a conventional defence way, we've closed with the problem, we've tried to put some order around the problem, and we've tried to, therefore, then discretise it into delivery steps overall. The Royal Navy's approach is a balanced one of adaptation and mitigation. We need to balance this, you know, trend and, you know, accepting and acknowledging the transitions that are going to go on, but preserve our role and responsibility in delivering our military capability overall. And that contradiction, I think, will be really interesting as we play out overall. You know, the pockets of advanced work, you know, the examples that we've used in our naval base, the examples where actually really have huge opportunity because we're a shipping owner, a shipping operator, a port owner, and a port operator. You know, the conversation about the Port of Tyne earlier on, I think, was really interesting. You know, we don't face those issues because, in fact, some of the stuff we've already done in the naval base has transitioned the sector or the system, you know, and we've made decisions and investments in our ships that reduce the energy consumption in our naval bases overall when our ships sit alongside. So we have levers available to us and we have great opportunities for us to get after it. Therefore, actually, as difficult a problem as it is, we're probably better placed than many others in order to solve this. We can't be excluded. We can't be excluded from the debate. We don't want to be excluded from the debate, but we do need to preserve defence's primary aim. And on that, I've definitely overstayed my welcome on the podium, and therefore I shall retire.